Done and dusted. Hooray. Thank you very much for listening.
Done and dusted.
Done and dusted. I like that.
Done and dusted. What is done and what got dusted?
You don't want dusty bad voltage. It's no good.
Hey guys, I've got this really great idea. Right? What we should do is we should be an open source podcast who is basically happy with the idea of everything that gets said in your house being shipped off to the internet. What do you think? Meanwhile,
Bad Voltage.
this is Bad Voltage, episode 49. I'm Stuart Langridge, and with me are Bryan Lunduke, the Duke of Lund. Say hello, Bryan.
Hi. I wasn't aware we were doing the hello thing.
We are doing the hello thing.
hello
Jeremy
thing.
Garcia.
Hello.
Howdy.
And the one, the only, Jonathan Edward James Bacon. What are we talking about on this show?
Hola.
Everybody.
Well, to start with, we're going to be talking about the endlessly expensive computer. The endless computer, a computer focused on the third world.
I like how, by the way, like the intro is going to set the scene for the rest of the show.
It's an introduction to all the complaints we will have about the ideas.
Talking about endlessly expensive, we're also going to talk about the Nest, and Jeremy's going to do a review of the Nest, and we're going to also have a little bonus kind of input from a mystery listener on the internet as well.
Mysteries. And then we're going to talk about Microsoft, specifically kind of what they're doing around open source these days, how they changed, have they improved, changed in direction and all that stuff.
And we've started a new series of segments. We're calling them Hack Voltage. This is where one of us will spend 60 or 90 seconds talking about something cool they've discovered, a bit of software, a cool hack they've perpetrated, something they've found out, whatever. And my one this time is on Gliffy.
Gliffy indeed.
Before Jeremy says something very important, and he has to say something very important, I would like to point out that I fully support this Hack Voltage segment. However, before we came up with this, I proposed a new similar segment called Bryan Thinks Y'all Are Stupid. That was rejected.
It was.
In favor of Hack Voltage. And if you would like to hear 60 seconds of Bryan Thinks Y'all Are Stupid, please let us know at community.badvoltage.org so that I can convince my super powerful and amazing co-hosts that we need to do that. Jeremy, is there anything on your mind right now?
Well, with the tone for the show now clearly set, and now, Bad Voltage.
couple of weeks ago, I went into San Francisco to have lunch with this guy called Matt Dalio, who runs a company called Endless Mobile. And some of you may have seen this. A little while ago, there was a Kickstarter campaign to basically build a computer that's designed for the developing world. And it's basically a little kind of box. It looks kind of neat the way it's an attractive little unit. It sells for $100, $150, something like that. And it basically runs Linux, and it's got a derivation of the GNOME 3 desktop. And it's basically designed to, be plugged into a screen in developing nations. So I thought it'd be an interesting topic to talk about, is this still a valid thing for us to work on? Because we're all familiar with one laptop per child, which didn't seem to work out very well, at least partially from my perspective, because it seemed fairly over-engineered in some ways. But the main argument of Endless Computer is that, when the guy was traveling around the world in China and Thailand and various other places, he saw that most people had a TV. So the idea of this is that you can skip paying for the screen and you can just plug this thing in and people have got access to it. Now, before I finish off describing what it is, the thing that he emphasized, which I think is interesting, is that the main goal of this thing is about delivering content to people. So, today when you have a computer, you have a cell phone, whatever else, it's all about apps. But in developing nations, people want content about, teaching themselves how to cook or how to deal with water sanitation or whatever else. So the content on this thing is actually, the apps are kind of like little bundles of content. So, for example, one of the apps was clean water, and it installs a bunch of documentation about how to boil water and all the rest of it. So do we think this is a good thing? And do we think that open source is going to help here? And what do we think are the main challenges standing in the way of this? What do you guys think?
Well, to start with, I'm at the website right now looking at the price and the specifications, and I'm noticing one thing. This is fucking expensive for the hardware you're getting.
Absurdly expensive. Stupid expensive.
Absurdly expensive.
And I think it's funny that the fact that they keep saying it's cheap, to Brian's point, just for people that don't want to look it up, it's an Intel Celeron with 2 gigs of RAM. It's $229.
Celeron. Yeah, it's $169 for a 1.5 gigahertz Celeron. Literally, this thing is, I would posit that if I put this down next to a Raspberry Pi 2, I'm probably going to get about comparable performance. Maybe a little bit one way or the other, but pretty comparable. And the price difference here is astronomical.
Yes.
Even considering the extremely strange looking case that would not stack well in any environment on this earth because it's shaped like this bizarre little tooth that just got yanked out of a monster's mouth. I don't see any point for this existing whatsoever other than a content distribution platform.
You're not meant to buy 5 of them. Right?
No. It's like if you buy stereo equipment for your television. Do you want it to be something that you can stack on top of your set-top boxes and your other stereo equipment and your whatnot, or do you want to make it so that it's impossible to stack anything together and you have to buy a completely separate table and shelf for every weird tooth-shaped monstrosity you buy?
Not like that. That's completely not who it's destined for. That's like, my kettle doesn't stack with things. It's not designed to sit next to.
Yeah. No, but they designed this to put it on a TV, and also to the point, realistically, this reminds me of, okay, if we're making a computer that's meant to hook up to every TV on the planet, so it evokes thoughts of the Amiga 1200,
Commodore 64.
An Amiga 1200 or a Commodore 64.
Spectrums.
Now, those, though, you get everything you need, plug it in, and you go. This, you don't get anything you need, now, not included mouse or keyboard or display. Now, display's fine because you're plugging into a TV, but it doesn't come with a mouse or a keyboard. So not only do they have to spend this, they have to buy a bunch of accessories.
Yep.
I never even thought about that. That's an interesting point that the computers in the 80s, they all came with keyboards. I mean, mice weren't really as much of a thing back then, but for computers that did, they obviously have an external mouse. And that would be an interesting thing to include. Do you think, though, so I don't know a lot about, I don't really care about hardware as much, so I don't know how price comparisons work. It sounds like this thing's pretty expensive.
I think calling it expensive is unfair, right? It's $169 for a completely self-contained computer. Yes, a Raspberry Pi board on its own is $25, right? But if you want the higher end one, it's $35, and then you've got to buy a Wi-Fi dongle, and then you've got to buy a case, right? So you're talking about that being $70. Maybe this is still, I admit, more expensive, but it's got more storage. It's got some storage for a start, right? You're also paying
gigs.
for the fact that it's quite pretty. I mean, you might think, oh no, it doesn't stack with my Technic CD
hold
player,
on a second.
but it's quite attractive.
Let's compare this. 2 seconds on BestBuy.com, $79. A Lenovo ThinkCentre with an Intel Core 2 Duo, an 80 gig hard drive, and a DVD drive. I mean, it goes.
I think it's expensive by every
that.
measure. But the thing is, if you look at their mission statement, it's most of our users live in places where access to information is restricted and computers are prohibitively expensive. And then it goes on.
That's true.
This is prohibitively expensive to someone in a third world by an order of magnitude, if not more. The fact that it's not cheap in the US and the UK means it's absurdly expensive everywhere else. So the fact that they focus on it's inexpensive, and then the price point is ridiculous. And it's the thing is, I loved One Laptop Per Child. I got involved in it very early. I thought it was a noble idea, an ambitious idea,
awesome.
A great idea. An abject failure for a lot of reasons in retrospect, and I think this project strikes me as very similar in that it's a classic case, I think, of the development program being tailored more towards the tastes and interests of its funders than the needs of the people that it's actually supposed to help.
Yes.
So I think
Moving
their
on from
goals,
the-
while
moving on from the
admirable,
heart, so-
this is so far off the mark that it's almost confusing.
So let me ask you a question then. So moving on from the hardware, so we think the hardware is a bit expensive broadly, right? So
literally to the point where I think I could build probably 6 to 7 of these using consumer grade prices for the same price as one of these.
But it seems like, moving on from the hardware for a second, it seems like the main, and at least from talking to Matt, the main goal of this is it's about the content, right? Is that the one thing, to be fair to Endless, I mean, I got one of these things. They gave me one, and I plugged it in. I gave it a shot and tried it out. And the elegance of how they've built this thing is they've done a really nice job on the software side. I mean, the hardware feels like high quality and all the rest of it, but again, not a hardware guy. But the software side of things, they've done a really nice job. And what's interesting to me, frankly, is less the hardware. It's this notion of bundling up pieces of content, because Matt's point was, in the kind of the target market that they're going after, people don't have readily available Wi-Fi or readily available access to the internet. So the idea is that, that they strike a deal with maybe some wireless providers or something like that. So basically you can bundle up chunks of content and send it to the device so people have got it on the device. And then when they need to look up something specifically, they can do it and minimize the amount of time that they can to the internet.
I just realized something that, Jeremy, when we first started talking, mentioned the price of it being $230, and I was going off the $170 price. I realized there's 2 units. The $170
one is a hard drive.
doesn't even have Wi-Fi. It doesn't have Bluetooth. I mean, it does. It's
No, that's why I said $229, because the $169 one is useless.
Right, so Jono, just so I understand this correctly, right? I get the idea that the apps, in quotes, that you get on it are actually large bundles of content. They're not just a gateway to fetching it off the internet. But is the idea that you buy an Endless and then you find somewhere that you can occasionally plug it into the internet to go and get a clean water app? Or are you meant to buy it with all the information you'd ever need on it?
Well, I asked him this question. I was like, are you expecting this to be connected to the internet from time to time, or are you expecting people to sneakernet stuff onto it? And it looks like they don't really know quite yet. They've definitely figured it out. So if you get connected to the internet, you can get additional content. They've got that. And they've actually done a really nice job with this kind of app store, content store that they've got. I mean, everything's free. But they've done a really nice, the user experience is really nice. That's the one thing that surprised me, was that from what I've seen with a lot of stuff that's designed for developer nations, the UI feels kind of cheap and clunky, and it feels elegant, which is nice. But what is less clear to me is the different options that they're going to need to get that content on there.
I mean,
the question is whether we think sneaker-netting content onto it is the right...
This is my question. If you are living in a slum in Rio de Janeiro, are you supposed to be buying this off of Endless, just you? Or is the expectation that, say, the Brazilian government buy 25,000 of them off of Endless, load a bunch of useful content to the people they're giving it to, and then hand them out cheaply or whatever? What's their business model?
I honestly don't. I honestly don't know. And to be honest with you, I don't think they know.
Well, on their
I think
website, it
they're figuring this
explicitly
out as
mentions
they
they're
go.
aiming it at middle-class consumers. It says,
like
according to our research,
here.
according to the research done by Endless, there appears to be a burgeoning middle class that has money but not computers. Surprisingly, while they are considered to be in the middle class by their country standard, they aren't able to afford even the cheapest computers. So it's a huge market of 2 billion persons. So it sounds like they're directly trying to market to.
Yeah, this is not going after the poorest of the poor. It's going after someone.
And they're
who's
not
a
doing
farmer,
the all PC model of
come
trying to
on,
get the Minister of Education to buy 1 million of them, from what it sounds like.
right.
Now, if going off of Stuart's idea, if Rio de Janeiro decides to buy 25,000 of these, it will cost $5.7 million. Just to put that out there. This thing is freaking expensive.
Dude, we get it. We get it's expensive. Move on.
Nothing
There's
after
more
that
to it than just the expense.
matters
So we're gonna,
at all, because it's completely pointless. It's going to cost more than people in the first world and third world. This is too expensive for them. It doesn't have what they need, so it's done. It doesn't come with the hardware it even needs to do it. So you're really talking $300 plus just to get possibly the lowest spec computer you could theoretically come up with.
We get it.
But then what's the point? I mean, there's nothing else to even talk about.
No, there is. There's lots of elements here that are interesting to talk about. Yes, the hardware is one element. Yes, it's expensive.
But they don't even know how they
fully
would
communicate.
So if it's about content
putting the cost completely aside,
putting
the cost completely aside, and I agree with Bryan on this one. What do you see, Jono, as the compelling point, aside from the fact that you met the CEO and he gave you one? What is the compelling point that you would like to talk about? Because I am interested in that.
No, I was just. I'm not suggesting that I'm an advocate of this. What I'm asking is whether we think what they're doing is interesting and whether it's worthwhile. Because what's interesting to me is more that they're building a, like I say, from the software perspective, they've built like a nice product and their focus is on content and about education. And whether I'm not familiar with a lot of places that or companies who are focusing on streaming content or bundling up content and sending it out to people, and how they assess what kind of content. That to me is interesting. I agree that it's expensive.
Do you remember
it's interesting, but I think Google Loon has a better chance of succeeding there than this does.
That's what I was about to say.
Yes,
I thought that was the
agreed.
Facebook one, the thing where you had the satellite and it downloaded like little chunks of Wikipedia.
Well, this was the whole balloons versus drones discussion. Yeah, Loon was the balloons and Facebook was the
But
drones.
that's attempting to target areas where people want their content and they want a certain amount of luxury and nice things and so on. They're not scrabbling to survive. They just don't have decent internet. Sounds interesting, but it's not clear to me that the way to solve this problem is by providing devices like this or Google Loon or whatever, rather than just making sure we bring internet to everywhere and then the problem kind of solves itself. I mean, this is only realistically useful to a demographic of people who already have a television with a VGA or HDMI port, want this information, have disposable income, quite a lot of disposable income to spend on a computer, right? But don't have good internet and don't have the ability to get hold of what we might call a real computer in order to do this. I would have said that demographic was quite small. They think there are 2 billion of them, fine. But is the way to treat those 2 billion people and bring them into this, just bring them better internet?
Well, that's the killer question, because it seems like what they've got here is an interesting device for consuming content. But is that only one part of the picture?
Well, see,
because
that's where I have to disagree. It's not a device for consuming content, or it would come with Wi-Fi. Their baseline model does not even come with Wi-Fi, so therefore it's not for consuming content. It's for running whatever open source apps they're bundling with this, and then it's done.
It's for consuming the pre-provided content.
Pre-provided content.
Right.
And getting no new content.
So it could be useful.
It's not for enabling communications. It's not for enabling research. It's not for getting updates. It's for getting whatever information comes on this gigantic monster tooth, and then that's it.
Bear with me here. I mean, it comes preloaded with a full encyclopedia. And when I was a kid, I had a set of the Encyclopedia Britannica, and that was quite useful for research, right? It's not like they're going to dribble out some tiny little thing and just shape your view of the world by only giving you certain stuff. I think if you're an encyclopedia, that's quite useful.
Okay, that is quite useful. But again, If you put together even just a Raspberry Pi based thing, you could come up with, for say $50 to $60, especially if you're talking in bulk, a machine that's significantly more powerful than this, hooks up to the TV, has Wi-Fi, comes with a keyboard, is
so
good to go.
I think if you read their site, they're focused
ready.
more on having a good design, which may be where some of the cost from. All of the cost things aside, I think the fact that they did research and think that market is 2 billion people, and where they're getting funding to have 22 employees, I have no idea. But long term, I cannot conceivably see this succeeding.
You know what we should try and do? We should see if we can get, because there's obviously a lot of questions, we should see if we can get this guy that I met on the show. Because I'd be curious to ask him some directly about some of these things.
Yeah,
I would very
I-
much like to have him on the show.
If you'd have asked me, I mean, and I'm by no means an expert at this, but if you'd have asked me how many people are there in that position of being well off enough to afford this, needing the content that's on it, not having good Wi-Fi, I'd have said there were no people, and they think a third of the world is in this position, so one of us is wrong, right?
Yeah.
Brian, you said a side note.
I was just going to point out that this also takes a 30-watt, 12-volt power brick, which if I were in the third world and had very little money, I would probably want a lower power device, such as almost any device cheaper than this.
Howdy, my name's Dustin Kirkland. I think I'm probably a pretty typical bad voltage listener, a tech geek and an early adopter of most technology. I've really bought into this whole smart, connected home wave of products. I love having a personal weather station. I love being able to control my home stereo and lights and thermostat from almost anywhere. In particular, I've celebrated the entire Nest catalog, first the thermostat, then the drop cams, and finally the Protect. I'm happy to say that I love my thermostat and drop cams, but at this point, I absolutely despise the Protect with every ounce of my being. My 7 Nest Protects have yielded over a dozen false alarms in the last 6 months. I had 4 false alarms in the middle of the night this week alone, while I was trying to sleep with 2 toddlers in the house. And that culminated in an open letter to Google Nest that I wrote at 2 in the morning, having been awoken by the damn things again. To Nest's credit, they've offered me a choice of either replacing my original Protects with their version 2 of the device, or my $700 back. I've decided to take the money and downgrade my smart house to the tried and true LTS version of smoke alarms, the old-fashioned ones that just work. So the lesson in all of this is that while I love running dev versions of my operating system and lots of open source tools, and I love trying out brand new, mostly working gadgets, and I'm pretty forgiving of their flaws, my home and my family's well-being is not something to play around with. The other interesting sidebar observation in all of this is that I addressed my blog post, tweet, and Google Plus thread very specifically at Google Nest. Google having acquired Nest in 2014 for $3 billion. In all of those threads, I was corrected multiple times that Nest is now an Alphabet company, and that my blame was actually misplaced on Google, that Nest itself is an independent subsidiary. I'm sorry, but I can't help but wonder if this is a sign of things to come with this Google to Alphabet transition. It sure makes it convenient to dissolve the responsibility in something as important as something like this. With Google come Alphabet's enormous investment in all of our lives, particularly through these IoT home devices like this, it's going to be important to hold someone accountable, and I hope someone's looking at that.
Jesus, okay, that sounded quite interesting. So for people who don't know what that was a guy called Dustin Kirkland, who has been a long-time member of Canonical, who wrote a quite angry review about the Nest smoke alarm. He got some version 1 version of it, and it didn't go very well. He wrote this angry blog post, and we asked him to do the audio, right? And didn't seem very happy about it.
And he's not the only one. I don't know if
absolutely
you've seen Brad Fitzpatrick, who works at Google now. He did Memcached and a bunch of other stuff. He was the guy that was the original LiveJournal guy. Has like 10 of them in his house, and he put it on YouTube, and they all went off. It's the Generation 1. And he puts them in a cooler, and they still won't go off. So he puts the cooler in another cooler to try to get them to shut up. It's pretty funny if you look it up on YouTube.
But as I understand it, version 2 is better, right? And
I would say so,
our
yes.
very own Jeremy has a version 2. So, why don't you tell us about it?
As someone who travels quite a bit, a smoke detector that can notify me when I'm away is a compelling device. As a technology guy who has a fair amount of home automation equipment, a smoke detector that can integrate into my increasingly smarter home seems like a natural choice. So why am I just now reviewing the Nest Protect? Well, the first generation Protect had quite a reputation for false alarms and a wave feature that was so buggy it resulted in a recall. And while I'm an early adopter who suffers through quite a few wonky first-generation devices, when it comes to something as important as a safety device, well, I decided to play it safe. But when Nest recently released the Nest Protect Generation 2, I decided to take the proverbial plunge. While the Generation 2 device is noticeably sleeker than its predecessor, it's what's inside that prompted my purchase. It uses an advanced smoke sensor called a split spectrum sensor to detect a wide range of smoke events, including both slow, smoldering fires and fast flaming fires. That sensor is shielded against outside light and encased in a stainless steel screen, which has a hexagonal panel designed to let smoke in and keep bugs, dust, and fibers out. This should vastly decrease the likelihood of a false alarm. The device also has built-in sensors that detect carbon monoxide, heat, humidity, occupancy, and ambient light, as well as, slightly disconcerting for some I'm sure, a microphone. On the outside is a central button surrounded by a colorful LED ring which alerts you to the current status of the device: blue during setup or testing, green for good, yellow for warning, and red for an emergency. Setting up the device is extremely straightforward. Download the Nest app, which is available for Android or iOS, select Add Product, and follow a couple very simple prompts. Total install time for me was about 5 minutes per device, although I installed the battery-powered version. If you opt for the hardwired version, it will take a little bit longer. You can enable a couple optional features during install, including Path Light, which will turn the LED ring into a nightlight if you walk by while it's dark, and Nightly Promise, which will result in a device glowing green briefly at night to let you know that it's fully operational. The installation concludes with a final safety test. As part of the install, you select where the device is located in your home. One thing that separates the Protect from a more traditional device is the heads-up feature. If smoke or CO levels are elevated but not at emergency levels, the device will loudly say, for example, "Heads up, there's smoke in the hallway." Once the level passes a certain threshold, the full alarm is sounded and you will start to receive mobile notifications. Unlike first-generation devices, you can silence the alarm from the app, although due to regulations, there are some parameters around when you can do so. As a network device, when one Protect senses trouble, all the devices will alarm. That means if the Protect on my third floor detects smoke, the device on the first floor will also alarm, making it much more likely someone will actually hear it. The device also regularly tests the battery and will inform you if it's low, hopefully making that just not often enough intermittent chirp of a dying smoke detector a thing of the past. There are some additional features that more advanced users may take advantage of as well. The Protect can integrate with other Nest devices, so for example, you can have a drop cam send you a picture if the Protect alarms. There is also full if this then that support with quite a few existing recipes available. This enables scenarios such as text a neighbor when the Nest Protect detects a smoke alarm, or add reminder to my calendar when Nest Protect batteries are low. These are definitely an added bonus if you're already into the if this then that ecosystem. So, what's the bad voltage verdict? At $99, the Protect is significantly more expensive than a traditional smoke detector. While I've only had the second generation devices for a little over a month, I haven't gotten a single false alarm yet. If that remains to be the case, the additional features, notifications, and integrations are compelling enough for me to justify that cost. That said, because I like redundancy, I also installed a more traditional, although Z-Wave enabled device as a backup.
So, first of all, Jeremy, I just want to say, in the history of Bad Voltage, that was one of the best reviews I think we've ever had. That was impeccably
Well, now
recorded,
wait
everything.
a minute, Jono. I think you're selling yourself short. I don't know if you remember the really old Kindle review you did about a year ago. That was pretty spectacular.
Kindle OG.
Well, you know, it's nothing like that, obviously.
Thank you for that,
Obviously.
sir. Much appreciated.
So, I have one main question.
Sure.
You've had it for about a month, right?
A little over, yeah.
And you seem to be pretty... Yeah, and you've... The feature set in it, like, I agree with you that, you know, yeah, it's $99, but it gives you an additional level of peace of mind and all the rest of it. But the real test about whether this thing works is, have you had a fire yet?
Luckily, I have not had a fire. If you read a couple of the more in-depth reviews online, a couple of people did kind of put this next to a more traditional fire alarm and set off different kinds of smokes and everything. The fact that it has the dual sensors really makes it a little bit better than a lot of, especially the $20 ones, will only detect certain kinds of fires where I didn't realize this until doing a little bit of research, but the particles in a smoldering fire are just a little bit different than the particles in a flaming fire. So this actually sets out like a 450 beam and a 900 beam, so it will detect them both. So it seemed to alarm roughly at the same time, but it was the warning went off at the same time as the alarm went off for the other one, which should be fine. And then it said the alarm lagged by about a second or two, which shouldn't be too big of a deal.
Well,
I mean, I think the interesting thing here, one of the biggest strengths of it is the fact that my third floor is far. I mean, I have a house that's pretty old. It's like 110 years old. It's very well constructed from a wall density perspective compared to newer homes. And I don't think I'd hear an alarm going off on my third floor. So the fact that they are networked is nice, but that does mean a false alarm if you have a bunch of them in your house turns out to be not a lot of fun, as Dustin has found out.
Literally a three-alarm problem. You kind of answered the question I was going to ask with the networking stuff in the review, but you can imagine there are just if you go and buy just an ordinary smoke detector, right? Not an Internet of Things enabled, internet connected smoke detector, just a smoke detector. Is the Nest better than that at actually detecting fires? Is it a high quality smoke detector with Internet of Things stuff bolted on, or is it just a bog standard quality smoke detector and the thing that you're paying the $99 for is all the networking and graphs and stuff?
So the Generation 2 is genuinely a good smoke detector, probably better than most, especially older ones, because of that dual sensor. The Generation 1, it turns out, is probably a little bit worse than a standard smoke detector. So you definitely want to steer towards the Generation 2.
An awful lot worse.
And the one thing I didn't mention, and my insurance company doesn't offer it, but they're partnering with a couple of insurance companies. And if you allow them access, so basically the Nest will, from my understanding, check in with your insurance company once a day, and it will report whether it's been connected to Wi-Fi, whether it's been powered on, and the battery level. And because your insurance company can then verify that you have smoke detectors, they'll give you 10% off your home insurance.
Oh, that's cool.
So I have Allstate. They don't participate, but that's
nice.
They could pay for itself eventually, which is cool.
So last weekend, we went to a party at a friend's house, and the guy who lives at that house, like he's basically made it into a smart home. It was the first time I'd ever really seen it, and he walked me through all the setup and all the equipment that he bought and all the rest of it. And it's the first time I'd heard the notion of this thing called Z-Wave, which this Nest thing has. So everything's networked, right? But the first thing I thought was, well, what happens if your Wi-Fi router is on fire? How are these things going to talk to each other? Is it like a mesh network type thing?
I don't
where
think
these smoke alarms can talk to each
Nest
other?
actually does Z-Wave. I think it does Zigbee, which is a competing standard. I have both in the house, and they can kind of talk to each other. So the smoke alarm is useful even without Wi-Fi, in that it will still alarm like a traditional smoke detector will. And the detectors can talk to each other using Zigbee directly. But if your Wi-Fi router is down, obviously you wouldn't get alerts to your mobile phone or stuff like that. So it would basically turn into a standard. So it is still useful, just not as useful.
How does the Zigbee thing work? Yeah, a high-level description.
It's basically just a very low-power mesh networking protocol. Same as Z-Wave, just a different...
Oh, cool.
So what Google turned into, what is it, Thread or Weave, or I forget the marketing buzz term, is basically an integration of Zigbee and Wi-Fi into one low-power protocol.
Yeah, I like the idea of the if this then that stuff. If my house is on fire, then send a message to my Google Calendar.
And there's probably like 100 or so recipes that some of them are some of them are funny. I think people are just being funny, but some of them seem genuinely useful. Like the Text My Neighbor one I thought was interesting if you happen to be close with your neighbor. Or there's actually one that integrated with like Twilio to give you a call on your phone and say, there's a fire in the hallway.
Well, it's funny because the guy at the weekend, he showed me, his recipes for this, and he's got like his gates, his locks, his light switches, everything is connected. And he had things like, if the gate opens after sunset on these particular days, then send him an alert to his phone, or, he has an emergency mode where if something's going down, it switches all the lights on and it locks certain doors and things like that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm going with my house. I mean, if I open my front door and it's not light outside, my living room light will pop on and stuff like that.
Yeah, we're going to do it as well.
Clever.
It's really
rad.
Cool stuff.
Yeah,
it's amazing. When I got into it just a few years ago, stuff was really expensive and kind of obtuse. And just in the last couple of years, things are rapidly decreasing in price and getting legitimately quite a bit smarter.
Do you have to bounce all this stuff off the internet? I mean, imagine you want to set up kind of when this happens, then do this. When I open the front door is open and outside is dark, then turn the light on. Do I have to do that through something like If This Then That, or can I have my Nest report to a server in my house, which then triggers actions?
Yeah, so the old popular one was Mi Casa Verde. The new one that seems to be popular is the Smart Things. So that actually sits in your house and can do rules locally. And I have a server in the house that can kind of do some similar stuff as that. And actually, that's a good segue. One person I had mentioned that I was going to review the Nest on Bad Voltage on Twitter yesterday, and one of the person wanted to talk about Open HAB integration, which I was not familiar with Open HAB. It turns out the Nest Protect does integrate with it, but it's pretty cool. It's actually open source software for integrating different home automation systems and technologies together. So you can do that. That integrates with If This Then That as well. So Open HAB is actually pretty cool. I'm thinking about
so this
throwing
is
up a server
because again, you've got 3 or 4 different competing standards. This is an abstraction layer over all of them that lets you work to one generic API, and then it talks to whichever one you've got.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And I do have multiple
okay.
in my home. Like I have Nexia does my locks and some of the lights and the doors and shades and stuff like that. And then I have regular
Sweet.
Z-Wave, and I have a bunch of different stuff.
You're really bought into this stuff. I mean, the light switch in my bedroom sometimes doesn't work. Right, that's how far away from a smart home I am.
So overall, then, Jeremy, it sounds like you would buy again.
So this is my first foray into the Nest world. I know you have a drop cam, and I don't know if you have the thermostats as well, but assuming that they don't false alarm moving forward, I think it seems like a well-constructed, useful product that I like a lot. Having only had it for a month, and given the first gen's widespread, it seems, problems, I'm a little bit tentative to recommend it yet, but if it doesn't false alarm, it's an awesome product.
The open source desktop is a bit short on decent diagramming software, which is like saying that Linda McCartney is a bit short on bacon sandwiches. We've got Dia, so called because it's, well, Dia. Or you could use LibreOffice Draw, which is like trying to conduct a seminar about PhD maths while you're in a crowded nightclub. Meanwhile, we're roundly mocked by all the corporate people who have Visio and by Mac people who've got OmniGraffle. There's now an alternative. It's called Gliffy. It runs in the browser, so it'll work on all the open desktops without having to worry about packaging, which ought to get even the arch people on board alongside them explaining how you must have dog turds for brains if you're not using the AUR. Right off the bat, dragging a new thing onto the canvas shows guidelines to line it up with other stuff on the canvas, which all by itself makes it more superior than Jeremy Irons in The Lion King. It does UML diagrams if you're the organised sort of sellout enterprise architect. It's got a suite of widgets like buttons and scroll bars and tick boxes for people who know that wireframes aren't just what Elite was drawn in, and it can export to SVG, so you're not locked into a doom-filled world of remotely hosted browser terror. Basically, it's great. If you need to draw diagrams, use it at gliffy.com. Right, you know how Microsoft used to be terrible bastards and we all spent all our time writing the word Microsoft with a $sign in the middle instead of an S.
Oh, such a
and they said the GPL was a cancer or whatever and so on. And it's easy, and you can look at them now and say, you know what, they actually seem like fairly decent people now. You keep pointing at lots of things that Microsoft are doing. Today, as we record this, Microsoft said they're joining the Open Video Alliance. So Microsoft Edge will play open format video stuff, Google's VP9 and stuff like that. And I keep finding myself thinking, you know what? They're okay now, right? And you want to distance yourself from that whole Microsoft with a dollar sign in the middle reactionary Linux attitude. And then every time I start to tentatively believe that maybe they're actually okay after all, you find out things like when they release Surface tablets and so on, they're locked down so they can only secure boot Microsoft stuff and they won't give anyone else the key. And there is no reason to do that other than to be bell ends. And so every time I start to feel Microsoft actually might be okay, I get a kick in the bollocks. Every time I start to think, you know what, they're just as bad as they always were, they do some kind of a nice thing.
Yeah, so, they're just trying to mess with you, man.
Are they? I don't think they're doing it just to troll me, although I'm...
No,
Microsoft are basically like an
policy.
ex-girlfriend.
Microsoft
are basically an ex-girlfriend.
My question here is, I mean, I don't know, should we be... Obviously, we should encourage the good things and discourage the bad ones. But in general, do you think they're basically on side now and occasionally they fall back? Or are they basically bastards who occasionally do nice things for PR or what?
Can it be both? Because I think, at least from my perspective, and I don't know what the rest of you guys think, but I think Nadella has genuinely changed the general attitude at the company. But it's a giant company, so there's no yes, they're better, or no, they're worse, or whatever it is. I think you're going to have individual groups still make bad decisions. You're going to have individual groups make very good decisions. I mean, they were the first gold member for OpenBSD Foundation in 2015.
Yep.
They're the Open Container Project. They are doing a lot of good things around open source. And I mean, Nadella said at an event to the public, Microsoft loves Linux. So clearly they're changing, but they have not changed, nor I think can they ever change fully. They're just too big of a company.
Well, they're such a huge company that, you know, I agree with you, Jeremy. I think what's happening here is they started heading in. I would say that the start of this all happening was about probably about 7 or 8 years ago when they started delving into getting interested in open source and maybe thinking a little bit differently. But the impression I got is that, you know, the Microsoft Open Technologies group that first of all kicked off, they were like this little wing that were trying to do the right thing and doing good work and working with the open source community and things like that. And now that's been integrated into the wider company. And in fact, I met with a person who shall remain nameless who works at Microsoft at LinuxCon, who I've known for a long time. And he said, you know, that Nutella has basically gone out there and said, you know, we are a company that has to engage with open source. Like, this is part of what we do. But percolating that kind of, that, you know, the Jedis into the wider Death Star is going to...
You do kind of get the impression that the Open Technologies group were without honour inside their own halls, right? Yes. Everyone was like, oh yeah, we do open source because those people over there do open source. They were like, yeah, look, we put a thing on GitHub, we're friends now. And everyone was like, fuck you guys.
Well, the impression I get as well is that, you know, my feeling here was that you had like lots of innovative and neat people at Microsoft doing cool stuff. Because I remember years ago, like, God, this was probably 15 years ago, going to speak at a Microsoft event, these developer days that they have all over the world. And I was up talking about Linux and open source. I was expecting to be basically walking into a room, a fairly not animosity.
Yeah.
I can't, you know the one I'm talking about. Anyway, walking into a room with animosity. And I was blown away by how many people who are sucked into the Microsoft ecosystem, who don't work for Microsoft and who do work for Microsoft, love open source. So the impression I got was that there's a lot of people who love open source, but they like using Microsoft technology. But the board or the senior executive layer of Microsoft are the people who are holding it all back. And that is all changing now, such isn't there?
Do you...
Maybe?
Well,
I think the one team that's clearly going to lag here is legal, right? Did you read there was a little bit of a fracas, as Jono likes to say, about the Windows 10 EULA. And you have to agree to it, obviously. It's 40,000 words, 110 printed pages of legalese. And one of the things, and this is really in there, we will access, disclose, and preserve personal data, including your content, such as the content of your emails, other private communications, and files in your private folders when we have good faith belief that doing so is necessary to protect our customers or enforce the terms governing the use of our services.
Man,
that
sounds like Google.
I mean, that sounds worse
at all.
That's terrible.
I mean, you look at the you look at the stuff about it phoning home all the time, and you remember the huge bollocking Canonical got about the Dash communicating through Canonical servers.
so.
Right? And not only does Windows 10 do all that, it also phones home in a million other places, and if you turn it off, it keeps doing it. Right? I was trying to get out a whole article about this.
I think the difference here is, at this point, I don't think anyone who's even just a little bit computer literate is under some sort of illusion that if they're going to grab like a Microsoft or an Apple computer, that they have a whole bunch of security from the company. They know all of their crap is being uploaded to their server. They know they're probably going to get their nudies hacked off. Well, that came out weird. And they know that that's probably going to happen. And so I think if they're sticking with those products, I think they're just kind of begrudgingly accepting it, because people just know that now. Even if they're not thinking, I'm going to move to open source or something wild and fanatical like that, I think they're just kind of accepting it. So I just don't, I think most people don't give a crap anymore. And it sucks.
I think you're right.
I think
people just accept it like, well, that's just part of being a technology user.
So you think it's just a further erosion of privacy becoming mainstream?
Yeah.
I ought to point out that I'm sitting here recording a podcast with a bunch of people like, oh yeah, Mycroft, give me all that Mycroft goodness. What I want to do is ship everything that's ever said in my house off to the fucking internet. And you all dove in there and chowed down on that as hard as possible.
No, wait a minute. The Mycroft thing is cool.
Yes,
I have significant concerns about it, but it is still rad. You can make something rad that has concerns and raises red flags. That's still worth doing.
I mean, I could see that I've only used it in a
perfect.
VM, right? But it's actually quite cool, I think.
Yeah, look. So what do we think is going to happen with Microsoft now? Because like the Open Technologies group, they've all been merged into the wider company. And like I say, from the people I know at Microsoft, the mandate here is that the wider organization needs to know about how to work more collaboratively with the open source community and this, that, and the other. But the question is, and from what I hear, like, this is genuine. This is not spin. This is a genuine part of Microsoft. The question is that this is a big boat to turn around.
What?
Do we think that they can head in that direction? Because there's always going to be people who are going to want to tear them down. There's going to be the Roy Shestowitz of the world who are always going to want to rip apart anything Microsoft does because of their history.
Of what they did in 2002, which I'd like us to get beyond. And Jeremy's point absolutely is that we're in an interregnum at the moment, in between, Microsoft McBellend going to Microsoft McAngel at the far end. What I don't know is whether what we've seen is that if they have correctly made that move to be open where we can, and the stuff that they're not doing now is because they have no intention of doing it. I mean, the perfect example is the locking us out of being able to install stuff on ARM tablets and things, right? There is the whole secure boot thing is a good idea. Stuff tends to be signed by the Microsoft key, but they will sign things for us, so that's all sorted, but not for the tablets, right? That's with a different key, and they will not sign our bootloaders with it. And there is no reason to do that other than flat out business lock-in. Right?
But
that's not cooperation. They have to do extra work to avoid cooperating with us, and they are doing that extra work.
They're always going to lock people in. I mean, Microsoft becoming a better company does not mean they're not going to use business models and practices that we don't like. Like, they're always going to be a proprietary software company. They're always going to use lock-in as a means to kind of keep people in. And they're not the only company that's doing that.
No,
I'm okay with that. I don't care about that. I care about
that are doing that.
I care about the like, it's like back in the old days, Microsoft locking people in with like Office's file formats and whatever else is one thing. But going around and actively shitting on your competition is a completely separate thing. And that's where I think that they've changed, is that like the whole Linux is a cancer thing was absolutely abhorrent as far as I was concerned.
Yeah.
But now they don't seem to do that quite so much.
Well, I think they've changed for an interesting reason, though. If you look at where Nadella came from, right, he was from the Azure division. So I think because in his mind they have a multi-platform strategy now that's focused not so much just on Windows, but on a much broader thing. Because of that, broadly speaking, Microsoft's interests, right, aren't directly in opposition with the entire rest of the computing industry. And because of that, they're in a position where they can more easily do things that will accidentally gain your trust because it's more aligned with them making more revenue. So I don't think they're just directly trying to gain trust here. I think their interests are just more aligned, broadly speaking, with the rest of the computer industry.
I think you're right.
Right. I mean, having individual products that they build competing against other products in that specific marketplace. I mean, I would take Excel as an example, right? Excel is quite a lot better than all the other spreadsheets around, right? It does more. It does it in a better way. I mean, you might argue, but imagine you believe that. I believe it, but that's tough shit to me. I can't run it because it only runs on Windows, right?
Well, do you have an Android device?
There's an Excel port for Android now, is there?
Yeah, it's been around for quite some time, and it's full and feature complete and pretty fantastic.
The point I'm trying to make here, that they want Excel to compete as being the best spreadsheet. It's not surreptitiously an upsell for Windows.
Right.
No.
And that's great. That's exactly how we want to see them compete. I'm quite happy if they build a thing and it's better than us, no problem. What I don't like is when you're forced to use a thing which is worse than us in order to get access to a thing that's better than us.
And to be fair to Microsoft as well, I mean, I'd say that back in the late 90s, early noughties, they were all about developers. Like the Microsoft developer experience was outstanding. They cared about developers. They had people who went out.
They cared about Windows developers, not developers. Just to be clear, that's a big difference.
I'm talking about their developers specifically. And they did a really tremendous job. And I think what's happened since then is back then, development was very proprietary. You picked your platform, you picked your tool set broadly. And now, the smart people who are writing code are generally using open platforms. They're using GitHub. They're using the developer base now is far more open. And I think they've realized, and I don't know whether it's Satya who made this decision or somebody else. I think they've realized you can't compete in that world with the business model of the 90s where you buy your IDE and you work within that platform.
Here is a potentially divisive suggestion. But I think the reason they've changed is because too many people are now not using Microsoft. They've lost the primacy that they had before. So if they force people into continuing to use Microsoft stuff, too many people are now outside the walls and then can't come back in. So they're being more open now, so you can use some Microsoft things without having to completely buy into their mindset, which suggests that people only go open when they're losing.
People go open when there's good financial incentive to do so. To Jeremy's point earlier about Azure, it's pretty heavy on the Linux side in terms of, what sort of instances and their virtual machines are running there. Microsoft's earning sweet bank. They're pulling in those sweet dollars from Linux, from, the deal with SUSE, from firing up Ubuntu-based things on Azure, and they're making money at it. Satya Nadella sees that. He wants more money in Microsoft's coffers because he's a business. And in the end of the day, if he can make money using open source a little bit more than on the closed source side of things, that's totally what he's going to do. And he's going to do it in a heartbeat. And now that it's been repeatedly shown to be doable, that's the way they're going.
Well, and the difference is, I think, echoing your point, Ak, about openness, though, and bridging these 2 points, I guess, is that I think the challenge that they've got right now is frankly, its relevancy, is that Microsoft have become, in the eyes of many, a lot less relevant than they used to be. And so it's not about, I think that's why they're scrambling a little bit to build really interesting technology across the fold. And the thing that I'm encouraged by is that at least they're doing it now within, I think, a fairer competitive landscape than they used to. They're working more collaboratively. They're open to the notion of openness. They're open to other platforms. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 2 or 3 years.
It is now the end of the most amazing episode of Bad Voltage ever recorded. Rocket. Is there anything we need to talk about? Wait. There is something we need to talk about. We need to talk about Live Voltage over in Fulda, Germany. What are the dates on that again?
30th of September. So it's coming up pretty close.
It is.
Nice. So, you need to go over to badvoltage.org/live. We're going to be doing a live show in Fulda in Germany. It's going to be a rocking show. We've got a great gig lined up.
I was going to say, we kind of ran over the rough outline of the show last week, and it is going to be, I think, pretty epic.
It is.
It's gonna be, yeah.
It
What
should
time
be
does it
amazing.
start in the evening, chaps?
I think it starts at 7 or 7:30.
We think
right?
it's 7. It might be 7:30, but a number of people have asked, and I had to shuffle my feet and admit I didn't know. So it's either 7
we'll
or
figure that out.
7:30
I was unaware as well.
on the 30th of
What's really
September
cool,
in Fulda.
Bryan Lunduke will not be there in person, but we have a on-wheels telepresence robot ready to go that I test drove yesterday, that I have not really talked with my bad voltage compatriots much about, but I test drove it yesterday.
It's a great time, by the way.
Yeah, I'm just letting you guys know. So I'll be there in robot form for whatever I do.
So yeah, it's gonna be a rocking show. It's gonna be a good time. So get over to badvoltage.org/live. Make sure you go there. Look, it's in frickin' Germany. So if you basically, Europe is the size of like frickin'
Delaware.
Yeah, it's tiny, right? So just you can get there. Anyway, also, we want you folks to get your questions in where you don't have any questions from the audience because we didn't get any questions, so that makes it pretty easy. So send your questions if you want to ask the team a question about something or input or ideas on something, send your questions over to show@badvoltage.org and we will read them out and answer them in the next show.
Yeah, we did run into the problem, and we were discussing Microsoft earlier, and basically we had to cut ourselves short because otherwise we could have gone on for about 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
But I'd be really interested to hear other people's thoughts on, do you think Microsoft are now good people, bad people, somewhere in between? So go to community.badvoltage.org and join the forum discussion about that. And then if there's enough back and forth, we might revisit this in the next show.
Awesome.
I also just want to pimp something. It's called the Mycroft. It's a open hardware, open source, open APIs, AI thing. I think it's cool. I have nothing else than that to share with you. Go to Kickstarter.
Yeah.
I did a video about
cool.
it. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, we have no relation
Tune
to
into the
it.
next
We
show
don't
where
have any
Jono announces
investment.
that he's now the community manager for Mycroft.
I ought to point out that wouldn't it just be easier to just make a tape recording of everything you say and then go around distributing it to everybody?
Yeah, that would be actually.
I mean, it
that
does
would be
seem like a very
classy,
cool
yeah,
device, don't get me wrong, but I am concerned about the privacy implications of this, and more importantly, I'm concerned about how eagerly you've decided to throw off everything you've ever said in the past and gone, yeah, I need that because it's got a nice box.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
You guys give me shit all the time about
I was going
my
to say,
views.
he's the least privacy aware person
fucking-
on the show, at least.
He is, and yet he's still more privacy aware than most people in the universe, and he's grasped onto this Mycroft thing with both hands.
I believe the term was like Jono leaves his tax returns on his doorstep in a shoebox.
Yeah, that was the specific
I believe
phrase.
that's
Yeah,
actually a
correct.
verbatim quote.
Well, I do actually quite like the look of Mycroft, I have to say, and I am in two minds about whether I want to back it or not. I'm still thinking about it, so go and have a look at it. At
It
least.
is kind of neat looking.
It is neat
I
looking.
just-
So my
just like
question
the
for
way-
you, Jono and Bryan, since you both seem interested, have you backed this?
Yes.
Yes.
I have not yet,
No.
but I'm reserving judgment because later this week, my puppet is going to be interviewing the guy who started Mycroft because I felt like, well, he should be interviewed by a puppet so I can ask him about privacy concerns. After that,
Mr.
if I'm
Lunduke rises
satisfied,
again.
I'll be backing it.
It would be really useful if you could publish that interview before the early bird timeout on the Kickstarter, so I can
Well, when
watch
is
it,
the early
get the
bird
opinion, and then maybe buy it.
I mean, it says Mycroft, play Uptown Funk from YouTube on my Chromecast. Can you really not just log into your Chromecast and play Uptown Funk if you want to?
Apparently,
Well, now wait a minute.
not.
Wait a minute. Let's not get into like a full like dissection and
This is
review
actually
of
a
the
segment.
Actually,
concept
based
here.
on your interview with
we
Mr.
could yell
Lunduke,
about-
I say maybe we should talk about this in a future show. But actually, I will leave that up to the listener.
Yeah.
What do you think? Should we talk about the Mycroft? Is this interesting? What are the privacy implications or privacy implications, if you prefer? Head to community.badvoltage.org and let us know.
gentle listener,
You can
have you-
directly impact what we cover on a future show.
Yeah, have you backed it, people listening to this? If you have, or if you've deliberately decided not to, come and tell us about it at community.badvoltage.org, and maybe we should have a decent discussion about it. So, I think that's all for this. Episode 49
I sure
is
as
now
hell hope so.
done and dusted. Hooray. Thank you very much for listening.
Done and dusted.
Done and
What the hell
dusted.
does
I like
even-
that.
Done and dusted. What is done and what got dusted?
You don't want dusty bad voltage. It's no good.
Just be dusty voltage.
I kind of feel like you want your bad voltage rare, though.
It is rare. It's only once a fortnight.
But you said it was done. You British people and your words are stupid. See, if you want 60 seconds of Brian thinks y'all are stupid, you could get more nuggets of wisdom like that.
There's a 15-second intro to that right there.
It's amazing. All right, we should all hit the stop button.
Yeah,
I'm not convinced that everyone's going to want this.
Thanks for listening.
Goodbye.
You had to get in the last word.